Okay. And hello, class. Welcome back to Ethics 2306. Today will be Chapter 8 of the textbook. We'll be doing feminist ethics and ethics of care. Like I mentioned before, this is a new chapter for the new edition, which is a good step forward for this author, Louis Vaughan, because before this, feminist ethics was just lumped together with virtue ethics. And that does make sense. It is in a sense, feminist ethics does emphasize virtues, just like Aristotle, but it takes a whole different approach, and it's become its own field in the past generation, couple of decades. So I'm glad that he's moving towards it's a new chapter in its own right, because I think it's really important. Anyways, in order to understand what this feminism is, I'll give you a little bit of the history of it. Right. So, in a nutshell, historians have organized this movement of feminism, which describes just really feminism. This term really just describes as a political, a cultural, economic, psychological, sociological. It runs the whole gamut, right? But it's a movement of all these fields that aims to establish equal rights and legal protections and equal considerations for women. Yeah. So you could take on a different array of issues that are feminist issues. So voting rights, right? The right to vote for women, the suffragist movement in the early 1900s, from 1900 to 1920s. 1920 was a date that women were allowed to vote in the U.S. Right? So that was the feminist movement. Right? So feminism has been around for a long time. As a fact, there's been like 3 waves, or arguably 4 waves now, of feminism, right? Of this movement, this political, cultural, economic, you name it, movement for the establishment of equal rights and equal consideration among the sexes. So the first wave of feminism really was all about the legal rights, particularly all about property rights and voting rights. So equal contract and property rights. So that was like the main goal for the first wave of feminism, which the dates will be around the late 19th century. So like after the Civil War, basically. So 1865, 1870, all the way to like 1920. This is the first wave of feminism. So it's mostly white women, upper middle class to high class elite women, and they just wanted equal rights, as in property rights and contract rights, to make contracts, to have their own businesses, to be able to sue, to be able to, partake in the legal community. The reason for this was that back in the day, in this time period, there was this concept or this practice, not a concept, it was a practice known as coverture, like cover, and then T-U-R-E, coverture. And what this meant was it was a legal practice that once a woman got married, her property, everything she owned, including slaves, so women back then owned slaves too, that was considered property, would become property of the husband, because the husband would now cover all her legal rights under his rights, under her husband's rights. This was the practice known as coverture. And so the first wave of feminism was really an attack to this legal practice of coverture. And it was really just made up of white women from the upper and middle classes. So that's the first wave of feminism. And you can see people like, Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the U.S., Susan B. Anthony, Angelica and Sarah Grimke, the Grimke sisters. Grimke sisters are really interesting figures in U.S. history They were born in South Carolina, where they have the most slaves and slave owners. And they come from a large plantation with a whole bunch of slaves. And then they went north to the north, and they became radicalized. They became abolitionists. So the Grimke sisters, you spell it Grimke, the Grimke sisters. Very fascinating sisters, right? Because they've experienced firsthand. I mean, they themselves owned slaves, right? As children, as 10-year-olds, 15 years old. So back then, back before the Civil War in the U.S., during your quinceañera, for example, or your sweet 16, instead of getting a car, right, or a nice iPhone, right, or a laptop or whatever, right, you'll get a slave. That was like the tradition for the upper classes back then. This was really the who were the first feminists, right? The people who had privilege, white women with privilege. The second wave of feminism sparked in the 1960s all the way to the 1980s, early 90s, and then changed to the third wave. But from the 1960s to the 80s, you have the second wave of feminism, and this was really a spring, a fruit from the civil rights movement. So during the 1950s, 1960s, you have the modern civil rights movement happening here in the U.S. Right, you have people like MLK, Martin Luther King. We talked about this guy last time. You have Malcolm X, right? You have the Black Panthers. You have all these big movements, right? Moses Foreman, I believe, is another from NCAACP. You have all this movement for equality, equal rights. And the second wave of feminism springs from this bigger movement of civil rights. Right? So instead of focusing on just voting rights here, the second wave focuses on cultural and political inequalities, on power structures that are sexist, that are patriarchal, right? The patriarchal power structures. Um, One of the most famous authors during this time period that kind of illustrates the second wave of feminism is still white woman led, um, but her name is Betty Friedan. Betty and then Friedan. And her book in 1963, she published The Feminine Mystique. And this book criticized the idea that women were only fit or could only find jobs through childbearing, child rearing, and homemaking. Right, this idea that the women belong in the home, this feminine mystique totally bashed and very academically, right, argued against that idea, which was the traditional idea. And for the most part, in a lot of family households, especially Mexican family households and Hispanic family households, that is the case still. Right? That the woman's supposed to stay at home and cook for the man and just take care of the children and make children. Right? And this is what feminism goes against, that women are more than that. Right? However, this first and second wave, as good intentions as they had, and as influential as they were still limited or exclusive to white women from the middle and upper classes. It wasn't until to the early 1990s, excuse me, with third wave feminism that responded to this exclusivity of white upper class womanhood that was representative of feminism up until that point. So the early 1990s uh, basically just argues that feminism up until that point overemphasizes the experiences of white women and excludes women of color. Right? So you see concepts by this legal scholar called Kimberly Crenshaw, and she has this beautiful concept called intersectionality. So there's intersections that make up your identity. So for me, I'm a Chicano, I'm male, right? Straight, and I'm middle age, whatever, right? And I guess I'm educated, right? So all those intersections, right? Education, sexuality, gender, um, identity, right? Nationality or whatever, right? Racial makeup, whatever, make up a person. All these intersections, all these little sections, and they intersect to make up one identity. Women have even a more complex identity because they're women, and then it could also be women of color, right? And they could also be poor or rich, right? So when we talk about oppression, when we talk about justice, says Kimberly Crenshaw in this concept of intersectionality, we have to take into account all these different intersections, not just race and gender, but also class, right? Sexuality, ability, if you're disabled or not, that also lends to your identity, right? And should depend on how justice should be served or not served to you. So this is the third wave of feminism, right? Just broadening the horizon of the experiences of oppression via sexist power structures. Um, yeah. So and then also this third wave kind of expands from a national concern, this feminism, to a more global international scope, uh, arguing that patriarchy and the sexism that oppresses women is not solely in the U.S. It's not a U.S. phenomenon. It's global. It's these intersections, this axis of oppression, as Kimberly Crenshaw would say, right? It's race, religion, right? Nationality, right? Or citizenship, right? Sexuality. All these axes, all these intersections, right? Oppress people globally, not just in the U.S. That's the third wave. And then I talked about the possible fourth wave. And then the fourth wave is it's kind of really emerging. People really are kind of taking this category seriously, barely. But it's like the LGBTQ community or QIA community, right? So the lesbian, queers, transsexuals, non-identifying, right? Fluid gender, uh, whatever, right? Whatever you want to call yourself, intersexual, whatever. All those different identities are emerging and are just as legitimate as anybody else's, right? This is the fourth wave of feminism, or it might be its own thing, right? People call it just queer theory, right, or something like that, right? But this is feminism. Basically, what we're doing is expanding our horizons of what is right, right? What is right, what is wrong, away from this perspective of a male. So going away from the history, so enough history of this feminism. Put this away before I get caught up in that. So I also teach history, so I could talk forever about the history of this too. But anyways, um, in ethics, thus far, we've been talking about only male philosophers. We've only had the male perspective. Um, think about right Aristotle. We just talked about ritual ethics. We talked about Immanuel Kant, right, the ontology, non-consequentialism. We talked about John Stuart Mill, although he's an exception though. John Stuart Mill did write a book during this time period in the 1860s, 1870s, for the rights of women. He was one of the rare philosophers that we talked about thus far that was aware of this oppression, right? This just you want to call it hidden oppression or private oppression that women face every day just by the mere fact of being women. And the reason why he was so aware of this, John Stuart Mill, is because of his wife or his lover. Oh man, I can't believe I'm blanking out on her name. Young. Her last name is Young. I forgot her first name. But that's the reason why. 'Cause she was aware she was part of this radical feminist early first wave movement as well. He was too. Anyways, but thus far though, right, we've been talking about male perspective. And what is this male perspective? So according to this psychologist, Carol Gilligan, and there's a little video of her in the little modules online here in Blackboard, so you can see her face too. But Carol Gilligan in a different voice. That's her name of the book, 1972, I believe. 74, 70s, wrote about how men and women have different moral outlooks, have different moral perspectives because of their specific circumstances, right? Their intersections, in other words, right? So men are more readily, or they understand morality in terms of justice, of impartiality, of universality, right? Being universal, right? All these principles that we've been talking about thus far, right? This is called the ethics of justice. This is what Carol Gilligan says. This is the ethics of justice. This idea, this emphasis, this super overemphasis on universality, right? Utility, right? On doing your duty, right? On all we talked about thus far in the semester, and that's like the men's perspective, uh, and it's been reified by philosophers ever since Socrates and Aristotle. As a matter of fact, let me give you some quotes about some of these famous philosophers we've been talking about thus far, degrading women, basically. So let me see. Aristotle said that the male is by nature superior and the female inferior. The one rules, the other is ruled. Okay? So ever since Aristotle, right, the one, the first one, right, number one, right, when we talk about ethical egoism, for example, we're talking about number one, it's the male perspective, right, basically. The one is the male. The other, el otro, right, the other person, that's always been the female. And this is something that Simone De Beauvoir in the second wave, I don't know if you can see this, but oh, it's upside down. But Simone de Beauvoir is perhaps one of the most influential philosophers. I strongly recommend to read. It's a pretty thick book, but absolutely essential to understanding feminism. She's like the godmother of feminism. Simone de Beauvoir, she's French, an existentialist philosopher. But Aristotle, since Aristotle, right, since the virtue ethicist, even at that, right, says that the male is superior by nature and the woman inferior, and the one male is what is it? Rules, and the other is ruled, and that's nature. Right? Aquinas, this is the guy who formulated the divine command theory, natural law theory. Aquinas claims that as regards her individual nature, each woman is defective and misbegotten. This is Aquinas, right? The religious guy, right? Divine command theory, right? As regards her individual nature, each woman is defective and misbegotten. So how do you fix women? Males, right? Men are going to teach her, right? This is the Aquinas vision. Um, let's see, who else did we talk about today? Kant, right? We can't miss Kant, right? Do your duty, right? The categorical imperative. Right? What does Kant say about women? So Kant wrote that laborious learning or painful pondering, even if a woman should greatly succeed in it, destroy the merits that are proper to her sex, and they will weaken the charms with which she exercises her great power over the other sex. Her philosophy is not to reason, but to sense. So let me read Kant, because Kant is very wordy, right? He's a German, right? So Germans just kind of add words to their own same word. So Lebenswand, right? So Leben means like a turnstile, and Wand means a film, right? So you mix those two together, you create a word, and you can do that. You just add words to make a big word. Okay, so German is really hard to translate into like English or Spanish even. But let me read Kant again. Let me see what Kant says. Kant wrote that laborious learning or painful pondering, even if a woman should greatly succeed in it, destroy the merits that are proper to her sex, and they will weaken the charms with which she exercises her great power over the other sex. Her philosophy is not to reason, but to sense. So basically what he's saying, Kant is saying, is that even if women are good philosophers, even if she does succeed in this laborious learning and ponderous pondering, whatever he's talking about, right? Basically, even if women are good philosophers, that's not her thing. Her thing is not to philosophize, to be rational. Her thing is just to sense. And that's how she overpowers the other sex. Basically, what he's saying is that, women only have her senses, right? Her sensual body, basically, right? To become powerful, to become equal to men, is by seducing men. It's basically what Kant is saying. So all these philosophers are not looking in a good light towards women, right? They think women belongs inferior to men. Right? I mean, yeah, that's it. I have another quote from Rousseau, but we didn't talk about Rousseau. We didn't talk about the social contract, so I'll skip that. But long story short, though, right? All these illustrious philosophers that we talked about, right? Aristotle, Kant, Aquinas, right? They all pretty much talk shit about women, right? They don't see women as equals, not at all. This is what feminism is trying to reprogram, trying to rewrite philosophy and the way we think. It's like, okay, yeah, they gave us some really cool philosophy, these thinkers, but they are sexist, basically. They are not giving us a full picture. They're not being just, right? They're being close-minded. So feminist ethics tries to correct, right? It's a corrective towards this myopic, right? This close-minded view of the man being superior, naturally superior. Right? All right. So what is feminist ethics, right? It's not a single theory, right? It's not gonna have like one principle. I'm not gonna give you like a feminist principle. There is not one principle. Like Kant, right, has a categorical imperative, or utilitarianism has a principle of utility. There's nothing like that at all. Feminism is just really like an approach, a movement, right? It's kind of like a family of different theories. This is what we call ethical pluralism, where it's just not just one principle, but this might be a bunch of different principles. And they might be contradictory. They might not all apply all at the same time. They might contradict each other, right? But this is a reflection of the complexity of life. All right. But there are some some four central tenets, some four central aims, you could say, of feminism, right? Maybe more, but four central ones, right? That we could kind of try to categorize. Again, feminism is really, really broad movement, but let's try to analyze it, right? So the first one basically is that women are moral equals, right? Women are moral equals of men, equality between the sexes, right? Um, that's the first one, right? There is no justification of why we should subordinate women's needs over men's needs. Right? There's a reason why. Why should we subsidize, right, the military more, give more money to the military in the budget yearly than for social services for women? Because there's priorities, right? And anyways, I don't want to get into that. But number one is about women being equals to men. Pretty simple stuff, right? The second kind of central aim or central tenet of feminism or feminist ethics is so the experiences of women, they deserve equal respect, right? And are also not only do they deserve our equal respect as the experiences of men, but the experiences of women are also vital to a full and accurate understanding of reality. Without understanding, without comprehending and acknowledging how woman experiences the world, right, and woman in general, the universal sense of the woman, or in every individual woman, either or, right? Without having this understanding, we're not getting the full picture of the world. Right? So what feminist philosophers are arguing here is that philosophy, right, whatever it is, whether it's metaphysics, epistemology, or ethics or logic, whatever, is only giving us half the story because it's focused on the male perspective. Feminism fixes that and gives us the other half, gives us the other side of the story, right? The woman's side of the story, or the lesbian side of the story now, the transsexual side of the story, to get a full picture of reality. This is what feminism does. Right? Number three, traits that have been traditionally associated with women, so like empathy, sympathy, caring, right? There's altruism, compassion, mercy, right? Right, we're traditionally seen as weak, right? Something that is not good for life, right? For politics, right? For sports, or for the market, right? But these traits, though, are actually essential for humans as well, too, right? They also give us the full picture of what it means to be a human being, and more importantly, for our class, right? These traits, right, of compassion, of sympathy, empathy, caring, altruism, right, mercy, right? All these traits, right, are actually essential for ethics, morality, right? Or if not essential or more important, at least just as important as traditionally male traits as justice and impartiality and universality, right? And fairness, competitiveness, autonomy, independence, right? All these masculine traits, right? Yeah, that's important too. But what's also just as important are these feminine traits when it comes to ethics. This is what feminist philosophers argue. Right? So the third kind of central tenet. And the fourth central aim is almost in a similar vein, but instead of like caring or these traits, is the way of a reasoning, right? Um, the feminine way of moral reasoning is just as important as the masculine way of moral reasoning. Okay? So, for example, what is it? Carol Gilligan, the one that wrote about these two different ways of moral reasoning between men and women. Right? She talks about women being more cooperative and men being more competitive, right? And women being more flexible and men being more stern and rigid, right? And women being more open, having more openness and being more closed-minded or closed off, right? And she says that we need to take into account both of these moral ways of reasoning, right? Ways of rationalizing the world. Right? And of course, I mean, not all men think this way, right? And not all women think this way, right? This is not the claim that feminism is making at all. It's just saying that these traditional ways of thinking we need to combat, right? Right? Not everybody thinks in these traditional ways, but they're still very relevant, right? They're still very powerful and influential in the makeup of today's societies, not just domestically, not just in the private home, but also publicly, right? Also with institutions, right? Look at Congress. How many women politicians are there compared to men? Right? There are way more men, political leaders, as women, right? Why? It's structural. That's been, that's not an accident, right? It's not. It's by design, right? It's historical structures, right, and forces that make these consequences, and this is what feminism is trying to correct. Um, and also like sports, right? I think sports is a really good, example as well, like politics, right? It's all about competition, right? Being the best, you yourself, right? I guess, I mean, there is cooperation when it comes to teams, but there's always that you always want to be the best, right? And that's not really how a woman's world is, right? Imagine a mother's love, right? A mother who was competitive, right? Even with her own child, right? That would be unthinkable, right? Or imagine a woman. Let's go a little bit more easier on that. Imagine a woman who has a child, and she's going to apply Kantian ethics. She's a Kantian, right? Imagine how that would look, right? And she's going to do things for her duty, right? For duty's sake, or because she actually loves that child, because it's her child. Feminist ethics And now, more particular, the ethics of care takes a perspective of this loving mother, right? What is the world of a mother, right? Would she be impartial? So if there's like three kids out there, right? One of them is her kid. The other two are, you know, having to be just hanging around there. And they are hungry. Who's the first one she's going to feed? You know, it depends, right? Really on the individual, right? But feminist ethics of care is like, you know what? It's okay to be partial because as human beings, we're social beings, right? We spend most of our lives in intimate relationships, whether it's with our parents, our grandparents, right, or our families, or with others, significant others, or even with mentors, whatever, right? We have relationships, social relationships, right, that are unique in each case. Right? So it's kind of impossible, right, or be really unfair or useless even to try to apply these principles that are universal to all cases, right, to all relationships. We need to realize that human beings are social beings, right, and that we carry ourselves via these intimate relationships with intimate people, right? This is what feminist ethics and the ethics of care in particular tries to get us to look at. Basically, life situations. Right? Um, it's it goes against this notion that you can unify every single real life situations into a single principle or a set of little principles, right? Categorical imperatives. It's like no, like life is more complex. Real life, it's more complex than that, right? There's no it accepts, right, the complexity, right, of real life. That's what feminist ethics tries to do. That's one of the goals, right? It's also against this notion of impartiality, right? That you always have to be impartial, right? That everybody is equal. Uh, and she says, like, no, that's not really how it works in real life. Right? In real life, you care about people more than others, and that is fine because that's the way the world is. Um, and this is what feminism tries to go against the grain here. This notion that you could become this, how did John Stuart Mill say, disinterested spectator, right? And then making the decision, a moral action. It's like, no, morality is ingrained in these intimate relationships that we are beholden to. Feminism is also against competition. Right? Because we are intimately ingrained in these relationships with also other social bodies, we need to cooperate. Right? Feminism is all about cooperation over competition. Right? Um, this notion of pulling yourself up from your own bootstraps. Right? For a feminist, it doesn't really work because that's really impossible. But every single being necessitates somebody else to survive. Not unless you go completely off the grid, but in the most biological sense, you need in the first 2 years of your life, you need somebody to look after you so you can survive. And then maybe, you become wild bill, whatever, be able to live out in nature. But for most people, we depend on other people for our daily routines. Right? If your car breaks down, are you gonna fix your stuff? You know, some people can. I can't. Right? My AC breaks down. It's terrible heat is coming on. I'm gonna have to call somebody to fix it. Right? Right? For every little things, we depend on everybody else, and this is what feminism realizes. Right? That we can't just like pull yourself up on your own bootstraps because that's impossible. Everybody's wearing the same boot pretty much, right? So we gotta pull each other up. right? We gotta cooperate and compete. And on the same vein, feminism also downplays, not downplays, but yeah, I guess downplays is the right word. The emphasis of rights, so-called rights, right? So think about what rights are, right? When we talk about rights, well, I have the right for freedom of speech. I have the right uh, for a religion, the right of assembly, whatever, right? Um, what feminism claims is that this emphasis on this, right, on rights, actually divides us more. When you ask for your own individual rights, you're asking for individual rights against someone else. Right? You're again abstracting yourself from your embeddedness in society. You're pretending pretty much that you're just individual, this autonomous individual that is able, that should get the right to do whatever they want, he or she, because right, they're autonomous, without realizing how embedded you are with these different relationships you have with all these different peoples on your everyday life. So rights kind of emphasize, right, this divisiveness, right, the individuality of people, instead of emphasizing the connectedness of people. And that's what feminism is trying to get us to realize how we are just connected, how we all depend on each other at different degrees too of dependence. A mother and a child, they're more independent than the mother and a clerk in Albertsons. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna treat the clerk at Albertsons or in Mata's food store that's on the street here, which is better than Albertsons, right? The clerk at Mata's, right? God bless her heart. She's a great clerk. I'm sure she's a great lady, a great mom, but I'm gonna treat her differently than the way I treat my daughter. You know what I mean? It's just kind of obvious stuff, right? It's just real life stuff, right? You're gonna treat your little brother differently than you treat me, right? It's not gonna be impartial. You're not gonna treat your brother the way you treat me, right? You're gonna send a letter, an email to your brother. Hello, sir. I'm sorry for this. You can be like, hey, ¿qué onda, güey? ¿Qué onda? ¿Qué rollo? You're gonna be talking to different people differently. This is what feminism realizes. This is our life, and we need to take into account these different degrees, right? Not be impartial and autonomous and universal. That's BS. It's just a feminist. Right? That's not the way the world works. All right. So what else does the book have? The book doesn't really have much here on this freaking chapter. I'm giving you way more than the textbook has. It's like I mentioned. I mean, it's a good job. He's doing his own thing. Um, but it's still not enough. So I'm doing my own thing here. So if y'all seeing this, you're lucky. You're just going by the book. You're not learning much. All right. Anyways, so I'm talking about different waves. So I'm just gonna give you some examples of really good books. If you're interested in this way of thinking, um, I guess I'll begin with the most recent one. So I mentioned Simone De Beauvoir, The Second Sex. That's what it's called. So the second sex, right? The first sex being the males, and the second sex being females, and she breaks down why. Right? She goes way back down in history, why that's the case. This is a really good book, really essential book for reading this. And then to complement this, she's French. She is white. She has that white perspective, right? Upper middle class, well educated, for the Sorbonne in France. Right? And then we have this woman, still alive, Angela Davis. She was a Black Panther. Uh, she's a badass. She's still a badass. She teaches philosophy and liberation studies, I think in California, University of Berkeley, I think. She came to El Paso to give a speech, and she's really nice to talk to. A really nice lady. But this book here, what's it called? Woman, Race, and Class. Right? So anticipating Crenshaw's notion of intersectionality. But in this book, she lays down the third wave of feminism. And this was published, let me tell you when. 81, 1981. And she pretty much calls out that feminism has not taken into account black women, and because they can't, because the black woman experience has not been respected. Right? The black woman experience, she begins with slavery. Right? Slavery has shaped, has structured, has contoured the experience of the black woman much differently than the experiences of white women. Right? So women, bless their hearts, she says, they're doing great, but they're never going to get to giving us equality. She's black, right? Davis, Black Panther, and you should look her up. She's still alive. Very amazing person. Um, Look, let me just read you what she says real quickly because I love her. Proportionately, more black women have always worked outside their homes than have their white sisters. Right, so they're sisters still, but they're different, right? The enormous space that work occupies in black women's life today follows a pattern established during the very earliest days of slavery. As slaves, compulsory labor overshadowed every other aspect of women's existence. It would seem, therefore, that the starting point of any exploration of black women's lives under slavery would be an appraisal of their role as workers. Right? So the role of women, right, today, you see black women working outside of their homes way more than the white woman, right, can afford. Working in the service industry, for example. Why? Because this has been structured, right? This has been historically structured by slavery and racism, right? So she begins with slavery and lays down how the woman experience kind of projected to today's world, or 1981 at least. Let me see if I can find another good quote from here. I mean, she really breaks it down on the differences of oppression between white women and black women, and she uses history to illustrate that idea. Right? A tremendous scholar, really, Angela Davis, really tremendous scholar. Um, all right, yeah, I guess this is kind of the reason why I want to take this time to read this quotes from Angela Davis is because I find it really pertinent and relevant to what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movements right now. And I think women are also overshadowed with this movement towards equality right now. So let me read you what Angela Davis says here in this book here. Black women were equal to their men in the oppression they suffered. They were their men's social equals within the slaves' community, and they resisted slavery with a passion equal to their men's. This was one of the greatest ironies of the slave system, for in subjecting women to the most ruthless exploitation conceivable, exploitation which knew no sex distinctions, the groundwork was created not only for black women to assert their equality through their social relations, but also to repress it through their acts of resistance. This must have been a terrifying revelation for the slave owners, for it seems too that they were trying to break this chain of equality through the especially brutal repression they reserved for the woman. Right. So she's saying here, right, the black woman today, right, this stereotype of the strong black woman, right, that stands up for their rights, which is very true. Right, the modern civil rights movement was not just MLK, right, it was not just Rosa Parks even, right. We have women like Ella Baker, right, we have even Anna Simone, the singer, the jazz singer, right. We have this powerful woman, right, that don't get talked about in history, right. Right, but these powerful women, right, they experienced the pain of slavery just like the men, but and then some, right, because of their sex, rape, right. Slave women were more expensive than men slaves because you can make more slaves. You just rape them, and you get more slaves. You become like a little factory, right. So she's taking into account all these historical facts to understand the different world perspective, the different ethical framework that black women live in today's real life world. And so yeah, so Angela Davis, super freaking powerful book here. Woman, Race, and Class. Um, then I have another one that I guess is much closer to home. Gloria Anzaldúa. She's a lesbian. She's Chicana lesbian. Yeah, it's upside down. I'll just read it for you. It's called Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza. This was also published in 1980. Let me give you the exact date. 1987. And Gloria Anzaldúa talks about the Chicana experience, and particularly the lesbian Chicana experience, right? Um, Going against the traditional norms of the Hispanic Mexican tradition, right, of male machismo, right. And she talks about this being right. So she lives in the border. She lives in the Texas border, not in El Paso, but in the South Texas border, like Del Rio, the Valley, the Texas, all that area. And she talks about how her identity, right, her embodied identity, just being a lesbian, right. She always was open lesbian, right, short hair, machorra, right? She always would. She talks like that in her book, right? I'm not making this up. Um, was always like a threat to the social system that she lived in, and she felt like the river or like a serpent going back and forth through the frontier, right? This in between space, not really Mexican, not really American, but beyond that, not really male, not really female. This interstitial space that she's like to explore, and she's one of the first ones to really like explore this experience of the Chicana lesbian experience in a very, very powerful voice, in a very influential voice for today's Chicano philosophy and Chicano understanding of life. So I'll read you a couple of quotes from this book. Marvelous little book. I also recommend you ought to buy this. Borderlands, La Frontera, The New Mestiza by Gloria Anzaldúa. So here's her with her own within her own culture, right? This is her speaking in the first person point of view. Alienated from her mother culture, alien in the dominant culture, the woman of color does not feel safe within the inner life of herself. Petrified, she can't respond. Her face caught between los intersticios, the spaces between the different worlds she inhabits. The ability to respond is what is meant by responsibility. Yet our cultures take away our ability to act, shackle us in the name of protection. Blocked, immobilized, we can't move forward, we can't move backwards. That writhing serpent movement, the very movement of life, swifter than lightning, frozen. Right? We do not engage fully. We do not make full use of our faculties. We abnegate. And there in front of us is the crossroads and choice. To feel a victim where someone else is in control and therefore responsible and to blame, being a victim and transferring the blame on culture, mother, father, ex lover, friend, absolves me of responsibility, or to feel strong and for the most part in control. Right? That's just fucking strong, right? That's just powerful fucking word. And should I just abnegate? And this is so ethical. This is where the ethics is here, really. Right? Should I give myself up for these principles, right? Feminist ethics, I'm sorry. Should I give myself up to these principles, right? Whether I got them from Kant or Aquinas or my mother or father or ex-lover, whatever she says, right? Or should I be strong and choose for myself, right? Like fucking A, right? This is fucking influential. I love it. Let me give you another quote from this lesbian Chicana writer, Gloria Anzaldúa. The New Mestiza, right? Name of the book. The New Mestiza copes by developing a tolerance for contradictions, a tolerance for ambiguity. She learns to be an Indian in Mexican culture, to be Mexican from an Anglo point of view. She learns to juggle cultures. She has a plural responsibility. She operates in a pluralistic mode. Nothing is thrust out. Thrust out. Nothing is thrust out. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Nothing rejected. Nothing abandoned. Not only does she sustain contradictions, she turns the ambivalence into something else. And she turns this ambivalence, this ambiguity, this interstitial space into sublimation, right, into her own identity, the new mestiza. And she goes on. En unas pocas centurias, the future will belong to the mestiza. Because the future depends on the breaking down of paradigms, it depends on the straddling of two or more cultures. By creating a new mythos, that is, change in the way we perceive reality, the way we see ourselves, and the way we behave, La Mestiza creates a new consciousness. I guess I'll just finish it off. The work of Mestiza consciousness is to break down the subject-object duality that keeps her a prisoner, and to show, in the flesh and through the images of her work, how duality is transcended. The answer to the problem between the white race and the colored, between males and females, lies in healing the split that originates in the very foundation of our lives, our culture, our languages, our thoughts. A massive uprooting of dualistic thinking, the individual and collective consciousness, is the beginning of a long struggle, but one that could, in our best hopes, bring us to the end of rape, of violence, of war. Right? And then, su cuerpo es una bocacalle. La mestiza has gone from being a sacrificial goat to becoming the officiating priestess at the crossroads. Right? Right. And this is pretty powerful stuff here. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I won't get into it more because I get really, really excited about this stuff here. But definitely a really important book. Borderlands, La Frontera, The New Mestiza by Gloria Saldúa. And then also by Gloria Saldúa, but an anthology with this Chicana, also lesbian Chicana writer, Sherry Moraga, called This Bridge Call My Back. You can see it. Also a very important book. And this one is more about this global turn of feminism, the third wave, right? How feminism, right, is oppression of racism and patriarchy. It's not just an endemic to the U.S., but an endemic to the whole world. Right? The U.S. the third world feminist viewpoint. This is what this book talks about. Right? The third world being not part of the U.S., the first world, or not part of the Eastern Bloc, the second world, but this third world, right? It's Latin America, the Africa, right? This third world feminist consciousness. Yeah, and I guess I'll just finish this this lecture with this quote from this book, from This Bridge Call My Back, right? This bridge, right? Talking about bridging differences, right? For this Osaldua, but with how? With my back, with my body, basically, right? This third world feminist consciousness of this embodied oppression, right? The prism of a U.S. third world feminist consciousness has shifted as we turn our gaze away from a feminism prescribed by white women of privilege, even in opposition to them, and turn toward the process of discerning the multi-layered and intersecting sites of identity and struggle, distinct and shared, among women of color across the globe. In recent years, even our understanding of how gender and womanhood are defined has been challenged by young trans women and men of color. Right? They required us to look more deeply into some of our fiercest feminist convictions about queer desire and female identity, the human truth of our evolving lives, and the two spirits of our two consciousness. Right? So this evolving lives, right? Even these feminists, right? These third wave feminists are being checked, right? Are being revised by the trans identities, right? These transsexual identities, and this is what is feminism is all about, right? This accepting, this openness of different identities, and realizing we're all somehow connected. This is the ethics of care and feminist ethics. Um, all right. So that is all for this chapter, chapter 8, feminist ethics. Um, Again, keep up with the discussion boards. The next following chapters are just a bunch of ethical issues, and I'm really debating I really should give lectures on these, because I really don't want to because I have certain point of views on each of these ethical issues, and I want you to make your own point of views on these, basically. And I feel that if I lecture on these, my point of view is undoubtedly going to be filtered out, and I don't want to taint you for making your own decisions. So part 4 is just a bunch of ethical issues. So parts 1, 2, and 3 is giving you the tools, right? The ethical theories, the logic, right? The landscape of ethics and philosophy. And now we're gonna have issues like abortion, right? What else? Capital punishment, I think. Um, Drug use, and I want y'all to come up with your own discussions. So for now on, we won't have lectures no more. But what I'll be very involved now will be on your discussion boards, particularly with these ethical issues, because I want to see how do you develop your own arguments, or your own ethical arguments. And what I'll be looking at primarily, it's not really your conclusion, right? I really don't care what side you take on, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. That's your own, like I said, that's your own thing to make up. What I'll be looking at is how you justify, right, your premises, how you argue towards that conclusion. That's what I'll be challenging you. Not your identity or not your viewpoint, but how you justify your viewpoint. And that's philosophy, right? I'm not really arguing against you, I'm arguing against the arguments that you're trying to structure here. Right? So now that's going to be my point, my focus now. Instead of lecturing, will be to focus on these discussion boards, particularly these ethical issues. Right? The first parts of the this is where the midterm splits off right here, right? Because it's just the first part of the semester. It's just learning the theories, learning the vocabulary, and then the second part, the ethical issues, is applying them. And like I said, I'm not going to lecture on them because I don't want to taint your own thinking. I want you to come up with your own conclusions. But I'll help you throughout the way via the discussion boards and also via email if you don't feel comfortable sharing the stuff like that. All right. So anyways, thank you so much, class, for another lecture. And we'll keep in touch via email, discussion boards, or the office hours. All right. Y'all be safe. Thank you.